Hello everyone and welcome to the Young and the Restless channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The walls of the Grand Phoenix seemed to close in around Phyllis Summers as tension wrapped itself around every word she spoke. Sitting across from Nick Newman at the GCAC, Phyllis carried the restless energy of someone standing at the edge of disaster. Someone who knew one wrong move could send her entire world crashing down. Her eyes searched Nick's face for certainty as she questioned whether he truly had the power to make the charges against her disappear. But Nick remained steady, insisting he could make it happen if she cooperated. Even so, trust between them felt fragile, hanging by a thread that could snap at any second. Nick wanted immediate access to Matt Clark, convinced time was running out, but Phyllis refused to hand over her leverage without guarantees. She had fought too hard and sacrificed too much to simply trust promises now, especially with her future, her freedom, and Summers' conglomerate hanging in the balance. The desperation in her voice grew sharper as she made her demands crystal clear. She wanted the charges erased, and she wanted control of her company secured before she gave Nick anything. In that moment, the negotiations stopped feeling like a conversation and started resembling a dangerous game of survival between two people who both knew the stakes were life-changing. Nick tried to keep his composure, but beneath the surface, frustration simmered inside him like a storm waiting to break loose. He warned Phyllis not to betray him, not to manipulate him the way she had manipulated so many others before, and the weight of his warning lingered heavily in the air between them. Still, he pressed forward, determined to make something happen before everything spiraled beyond repair. Across town, he sought out Christine Blair Romalotti, hoping to convince her to drop the charges against Phyllis in exchange for something far bigger. But Christine was no fool, and the moment Nick presented the idea, suspicion flashed across her face. She reminded him there was clear evidence of fraud, clear proof that Phyllis had crossed legal lines, and she couldn't understand why Nick was suddenly so eager to protect her. Nick argued passionately that the real threat was Matt Clark, that bringing him down mattered more than punishing Phyllis. But Christine refused to accept that the two situations were mutually exclusive. The deeper the conversation went, the clearer the truth became to her, until realization finally hit like a lightning strike. Phyllis must already have Matt hidden somewhere. Furious, Christine accused Nick of letting himself get manipulated yet again, her disappointment cutting deeper because she knew he was risking everything by playing Phyllis's dangerous game. Meanwhile, over at Crimson Lights, Phyllis's nerves only continued to unravel as she searched frantically for Matt. Every passing second increased the pressure bearing down on her shoulders, and the situation became even more explosive when Sharon Newman unexpectedly appeared. Sharon wasted no time unleashing her anger, confronting Phyllis over the chaos surrounding Matt and the danger that continued spreading through Genoa City because of her actions. The confrontation carried years of bitterness beneath every sentence, years of wounds and betrayals that had never fully healed between the two women. Yet Phyllis, cornered and emotionally exhausted, refused to shoulder the blame alone. Instead, she pointed directly at Victor Newman, insisting he had forced her into this impossible position and pushed her back against the wall until survival became her only option. The tension between Sharon and Phyllis crackled like electricity, each woman refusing to back down as old rivalries collided with new dangers. Around them, the familiar warmth of Crimson Lights suddenly felt cold and uneasy, as though even the cafe itself could sense the storm building over Genoa City. Elsewhere, inside the elegant atmosphere of society, another battle was unfolding, one rooted not in fear, but in divided loyalties and family conflict. Adam Newman and Chelsea Lawson found themselves clashing over Nick and the dangerous path he was walking. Chelsea believed the priority was obvious, getting Matt Clark off the streets before anyone else got hurt. To her, protecting people mattered more than corporate power plays or reclaiming Newman Enterprises. But Adam saw things differently, carrying the frustration and bitterness of years spent watching the Newman empire fracture and slip further away from the family. He argued passionately that Newman Enterprises needed to return to its rightful owners, and he feared Nick's emotional involvement with Phyllis could destroy any chance of that happening. Yet beneath Adam's anger was something far more painful: fear for his brother. As his voice softened, he admitted he believed Nick was still using drugs and that all this chaos surrounding Matt had become an excuse to avoid confronting his addiction. The moment shifted emotionally as Chelsea comforted him, sensing how deeply Adam's concern was rooted in love, guilt, and helplessness. For all the fighting between the Newman brothers over the years, Adam couldn't shake the fear that Nick was slowly destroying himself while everyone else was too distracted to notice. That fear followed Adam all the way to the Newman ranch, where he brought his concerns directly to Victor. The grand estate, usually a symbol of strength and control, suddenly felt heavy with uncertainty as Adam warned his father that Nick might make his own secret deal with Phyllis. Victor listened carefully, his expression unreadable, but the tension behind his eyes revealed that he understood exactly how dangerous the situation had become. Every member of the Newman family seemed to be moving pieces around an invisible chessboard, and no one could predict who would lose when the game finally ended. The possibility that Nick could strike a desperate bargain with Phyllis threatened to ignite even more chaos inside an already fractured family. As Adam spoke, the weight of generations of Newman conflict lingered in the room like a shadow that refused to disappear. Family loyalty, betrayal, addiction, power, and desperation were all colliding at once, creating a storm no one seemed capable of stopping. And somewhere in the middle of it all stood Nick, struggling to save everyone else while quietly losing control of himself. But perhaps the most haunting encounter of all unfolded quietly at the Park Cafe, far away from the corporate wars and family confrontations consuming Genoa City. There, Patty Williams arrived after being summoned by Matt Clark himself. From the moment Patty sat down with him, she could see the pain buried behind his confusion, the torment of a man desperately trying to understand who he really was. Matt admitted how lost he felt, how fragmented his memories remained, and Patty gently confirmed that much of what Phyllis had said about her past was true. There was sadness in the honesty she carried, the quiet ache of someone who had spent years being judged and feared. Yet Patty also revealed something else. She had gotten treatment, she had worked to heal, and now she wanted to remain in town long enough to prove she was no longer the person everyone remembered. As she spoke about coming from a wealthy and powerful family that hated her, Matt began to recognize pieces of himself inside her story. Their connection deepened with every word, and Matt quietly admitted it almost felt as though they were the same person. Two damaged souls abandoned by the people who should have loved them most. The emotional bond between them only intensified as Matt confessed he couldn't continue living without answers. The emptiness inside him had become unbearable, and more than anything, he needed to recover his memories and finally understand the truth about his life. Patty listened with compassion, but her concern soon shifted toward Phyllis. With growing urgency, she warned Matt not to trust her, explaining that Phyllis was deeply connected to the Newman family through her past marriage and through her daughter, Summer Newman. Patty insisted that Phyllis already knew why the Newmans despised Matt and claimed she was secretly setting him up for something far worse than he realized. The warning unsettled Matt deeply, but disbelief clouded his reaction because Phyllis had shown him kindness when few others had. Torn between loyalty and suspicion, Matt struggled to know who he could trust anymore. Yet Patty remained unwavering, promising him she would handle Phyllis herself and assuring him that no matter what happened, she had his back. As the evening shadows settled across the Park Cafe and the tension gripping Genoa City continued to tighten, Matt sat trapped in the center of a mystery he still couldn't fully understand, confused, vulnerable, and unknowingly standing at the heart of a storm that was only beginning to explode. As night slowly settled over Genoa City, the tension surrounding Matt Clark began spreading through every corner of town like a gathering thunderstorm no one could escape. Inside the dim glow of the Park Cafe, Matt remained frozen in thought after Patty's chilling warning about Phyllis. Her words echoed endlessly in his mind, twisting together with fragmented memories he still couldn't fully grasp. Every face around him now seemed layered with hidden motives, every act of kindness suddenly shadowed by suspicion. The confusion tearing through him became almost unbearable because, for the first time since arriving in Genoa City, he realized he might not know the truth about anyone. Not Phyllis, not the Newmans, and certainly not himself. Patty watched the conflict unfold across his face with deep concern, recognizing the same loneliness and emotional isolation she herself had once carried for years. In Matt, she saw someone drowning beneath the weight of secrets and manipulation. a man desperate for connection while unknowingly standing in the middle of a dangerous web of power and betrayal. And the more Patty looked at him, the more fiercely protective she became, almost as if saving Matt had somehow become her chance to save the broken parts of herself, too. Across town, Phyllis was rapidly losing control of the situation she had fought so hard to manage. Back at Crimson Lights, the pressure surrounding her grew heavier with every passing minute, and Sharon's confrontations still lingered in the air like a wound left freshly opened. Though Phyllis continued blaming Victor for forcing her into a corner, even she could feel the cracks beginning to form in her carefully built plan. She had convinced herself she could outmaneuver everyone: Victor, Nick, Christine, even Matt himself. But the reality was becoming far messier than she anticipated. Fear crept into her thoughts as she realized too many people were now closing in from every direction.
Christine was suspicious, Sharon was furious, Victor was unpredictable, and Nick was dangerously desperate to regain control before his own life spiraled further apart. Yet despite everything, Phyllis still clung tightly to the one thing she believed could save her: leverage. Matt remained her bargaining chip, her protection against the storm gathering around her, and she refused to surrender that advantage until she secured her own survival. But beneath her determination was exhaustion, the emotional fatigue of a woman who had spent so many years fighting battles that she no longer knew how to stop fighting at all. Meanwhile, Nick carried the crushing weight of impossible choices as he moved between family loyalty, legal risks, and growing personal demons. His meeting with Christine had left him deeply shaken because her accusations struck closer to the truth than he wanted to admit. Christine had seen through the arrangement almost immediately, recognizing that Nick was allowing Phyllis to dictate the terms because he believed Matt represented a far greater danger. But what frightened Nick most was the realization that everyone around him was beginning to notice his instability. Adam suspected he was still using drugs. Chelsea feared he was spiraling. Victor no longer fully trusted his judgment. Even Christine looked at him with the wary concern reserved for someone standing dangerously close to self-destruction. Yet Nick continued pushing forward because, in his mind, there was simply too much at stake to stop now. Every decision he made felt like a gamble between saving lives and destroying his own future. And the deeper he sank into the chaos, the harder it became to separate desperation from determination. At Society, Adam couldn't shake the growing fear gnawing at him after his conversation with Chelsea. Though their argument had ended quietly, the emotional weight of it stayed with him long afterward. Watching Nick unravel was reopening wounds Adam had tried for years to bury, reminding him of how fragile the Newman family truly was beneath all its wealth and power. For all their influence, the Newmans remained trapped in cycles of betrayal, addiction, rivalry, and emotional destruction that money could never fix. Chelsea's attempts to comfort Adam came from genuine compassion, but even she seemed uncertain about how much damage had already been done. Adam feared Nick wasn't simply making risky decisions anymore. He feared his brother was actively losing himself. The possibility that Nick might secretly strike a deal with Phyllis terrified him, because Adam understood better than anyone how dangerous desperation could become when mixed with family pressure and addiction. As he stood at the Newman Ranch speaking with Victor, Adam could sense his father calculating every possible outcome, already preparing for war if Nick crossed the wrong line. And in true Newman fashion, concern for family and ruthless strategy were beginning to blur together into something cold and dangerous. Back at the Park Cafe, Patty's bond with Matt deepened as the night wore on, creating one of the few moments of genuine emotional honesty in the middle of Genoa City's growing chaos. Matt spoke openly about the torment of living without clear memories, describing the hollow feeling of waking up every day unsure whether the people around him were allies or enemies. Patty listened with unusual tenderness, understanding that kind of emotional isolation better than almost anyone. She admitted that for years she had lived under the weight of judgment, fear, and rejection, constantly defined by the worst moments of her life, no matter how hard she tried to change. That shared pain created an almost haunting connection between them, as though two fractured souls had somehow recognized themselves in each other. Patty warned him once again that Phyllis could not be trusted, insisting Phyllis already knew far more about his past than she was admitting. But Matt remained conflicted because, despite everything, he wanted to believe Phyllis had helped him out of genuine compassion. That internal struggle became painfully visible in his eyes, and Patty could see how vulnerable he truly was beneath his guarded exterior. So, when she promised she would protect him and stand beside him no matter what happened, the words carried real emotional weight, perhaps the first sense of safety Matt had felt since his entire world began unraveling. As dawn edged closer and the city prepared for another day of secrets and confrontation, every storyline seemed to tighten toward an inevitable collision. Phyllis was desperately trying to maintain control before the walls closed in around her completely. Nick was risking everything to stop Matt, while quietly battling the demons everyone feared were consuming him again. Adam and Victor were preparing for the fallout they believed was coming, while Sharon and Christine refused to let Phyllis manipulate the situation any longer. And at the center of it all stood Matt himself, a man surrounded by enemies, allies, lies, and fractured memories, struggling to understand which version of the truth would ultimately destroy him. The closer he moved toward recovering his past, the more dangerous everything around him became. In Genoa City, loyalties were shifting by the hour, trust was becoming impossible, and emotions were burning hotter than ever. And as the storm continued building around Matt Clark, one thing became painfully clear. When the truth finally surfaced, it would change everything for everyone caught in its path. The following morning arrived beneath a gray and restless sky, and across Genoa City, it felt as though the entire town was holding its breath before an explosion no one could prevent. Inside her suite at the GCAC, Phyllis paced endlessly from one side of the room to the other, unable to quiet the panic building inside her chest. Every sound outside the door made her tense. Every phone notification sent another wave of anxiety crashing through her already fragile composure. She kept replaying Sharon's accusations, Christine's growing suspicion, and Nick's warning not to betray him, but none of those fears rattled her as deeply as the possibility that Matt might already be slipping beyond her control. For all her confidence and manipulation, Phyllis understood one terrifying truth better than anyone else. Once people stopped trusting her, they became dangerous. And now, trust was crumbling everywhere around her. Yet even in the middle of her fear, Phyllis refused to surrender. She convinced herself that if she could just keep Matt close a little longer, if she could force Victor and Nick into honoring their promises, then maybe she could still walk away from the disaster with her freedom, her company, and her future intact. But the cracks in her plan were widening by the minute, and deep down, she could already feel the inevitable collapse creeping closer. At the Newman Ranch, the atmosphere was no less tense. Victor sat in silence for long stretches after Adam finished explaining his concerns about Nick, and the quiet inside the massive living room carried more weight than shouting ever could. Adam remained visibly unsettled, unable to shake the image of his brother spiraling deeper into desperation while pretending everything was under control. The fear in Adam's voice became impossible to ignore as he admitted he believed Nick was using again, hiding behind the Matt situation to avoid confronting the addiction threatening to consume him. Victor's expression darkened at the suggestion, not because he doubted Adam, but because he recognized how believable it sounded. The Newman patriarch had spent years watching his children destroy themselves in pursuit of power, love, revenge, or escape, and he knew desperation often pushed people toward their worst instincts. Though Victor remained outwardly calm, his mind was already calculating every possible outcome, every betrayal, every contingency plan. He warned Adam that if Nick truly intended to strike his own private deal with Phyllis, then the consequences could spread far beyond legal trouble or corporate power struggles. This situation was becoming personal, emotional, and dangerously unstable. And when emotions ruled the Newman family, destruction was usually close behind. Meanwhile, Nick found himself standing alone in the middle of a crisis that seemed to be swallowing every corner of his life. After leaving Christine, he could still hear her furious words ringing in his ears, accusing him of allowing Phyllis to manipulate him yet again. Part of him hated that she might be right. Another part hated that he no longer knew whether he was acting out of logic or pure desperation. Nick kept telling himself he was trying to stop Matt before someone got hurt.
But the deeper he sank into the situation, the more complicated everything became. His loyalty to family, his history with Phyllis, and the growing pressure surrounding his addiction were all colliding at once, creating emotional chaos he could barely manage. Alone with his thoughts, Nick appeared exhausted in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. There was guilt in him, fear in him, and a painful sense that he was slowly losing the trust of everyone who once believed in him. Yet despite the emotional weight crushing down on him, he refused to stop. Nick had reached a point where turning back no longer felt possible, even if moving forward threatened to destroy him completely. Elsewhere in Genoa City, Sharon could not shake the unease left behind after confronting Phyllis at Crimson Lights. Long after the argument ended, Sharon remained haunted by the feeling that the entire situation surrounding Matt was even darker than anyone realized. She knew Phyllis better than most people ever could, knew how fiercely she fought when cornered, and knew how dangerous she became when survival was on the line. But what unsettled Sharon most was the emotional instability surrounding everyone involved. Nick was unraveling, Phyllis was desperate, Victor was maneuvering behind the scenes, and Matt himself seemed completely lost inside a maze of missing memories and manipulation. Sharon sensed that none of this would end cleanly, and the emotional cost for everyone involved was growing higher every day. As she sat quietly reflecting on everything unfolding around her, a deep sadness settled in her expression, because beneath all the anger and rivalry, she could see how broken everyone had become. Years of betrayals, lies, and emotional wounds had pushed them all into another cycle of destruction, and no one seemed strong enough to stop it before someone got seriously hurt. At the Park Cafe, Matt's emotional turmoil only deepened after Patty's warnings about Phyllis. He sat staring blankly into the distance, caught between instinct and confusion, trying desperately to sort through the fragments of memory flickering in the back of his mind. Faces, voices, emotions, all of it came to him in incomplete flashes that vanished before he could fully understand them. Patty remained beside him, calm but deeply protective, sensing how vulnerable he truly was beneath his uncertainty. She continued urging him not to trust Phyllis, insisting the woman was hiding critical truths about his connection to the Newman family. Yet every time Matt tried to accept that possibility, memories of Phyllis helping him surfaced again, making it impossible for him to fully believe she intended to betray him. The emotional conflict tore at him from every direction, because he no longer knew which version of reality was genuine. Patty, however, seemed more certain than ever. Having spent years being manipulated, judged, and abandoned herself, she recognized the warning signs Matt was too emotionally overwhelmed to see. And as she quietly promised once again that she would protect him no matter what happened, the bond forming between them began to feel less accidental and more fatefully inevitable. As the hours passed, the storm hanging over Genoa City continued growing darker, drawing every character closer toward a collision none of them were prepared for. Phyllis was still fighting to keep control before everything slipped through her fingers. Nick was balancing on the edge of emotional collapse while trying to save everyone around him. Adam and Victor were preparing for betrayals they feared had already begun. Sharon sensed tragedy looming closer with every passing hour. Christine was determined to expose the truth no matter who got hurt in the process. And at the center of it all, Matt remained trapped between manipulation, missing memories, and the desperate search for his identity. Every secret, every lie, and every hidden connection was slowly tightening around him like a noose. And as the tension built toward an unavoidable breaking point, one chilling truth became impossible to ignore. When Matt Clark finally remembered who he truly was, the shockwaves would tear through Genoa City in ways none of them could survive unchanged.